Okay, next review for the week is going to be Wizard's Tower, a LitRPG adventure written by Gregory Allenther. It is 400 pages. It is $3.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the author's description. The humans call me Nemon Fargus. They call me Wizard, and Elementalist, and Enchanter. They call me Teacher. They call me Adventurer. But I don't care. Not anymore. For more than 150 years, I've served the Kingdom of Sena. Through 4 kings and a queen. 2 wars and a rebellion. I founded and taught at a magic school. I fought against beast waves and dungeon breaks. But now the one close friend I had has passed. So I'm done with their politics and their economics. The short and busy lives of humans are more burden than benefit on the weary soul of this half-elf. Now I'm looking for a refuge. A place that can well and truly be my own. Away from the growing cities and the bustling markets, away from the pointless wars, away from the eager students and the arrogant adventurers. I'm seeking the peaceful life of a wizard in his tower, studying magic to advance my spellcraft. We'll see if that happens. Okay, pretty good. I've also been practicing some of my narration voices. I'm like, oh, this might be a nice place to test these things out. This is a serial story that has made its way to Amazon, and it follows Nemon Fargus as he quits his adventuring and goes to establish his very own wizard's tower, dealing with apprentices, kingdoms, and country politics, sly machinations and nobility, and his own history as someone that had lived for several hundred years due to his half-elf nature. There's some pretty decent fights, but the story lacks a lot of the RPG progression I was hoping for. And again, a lot of this has to do with the fact that it is a serial story, so it's serial stories and slice stories in particular are developed a little bit differently. You're just generally following the main character as he goes and does stuff. And that's definitely what this is. There's no like 3-arc structure. There's no thing like, oh, he's saving the world from a particular thing. And a lot of I think this first book ends up being is set up for a longer series. But this is a much longer series online, so you can always check it out there. But this is just like the first kind of arc to get him into the Wizard's Tower and set up for a lot of the political conflicts and monster potential conflicts that may be threatening the larger world as a landscape. But that's what the story is at its core, I think, at least for me. I haven't read the longer series online, so I can't speak to what's coming in the future. I'm only guessing at this point. But it feels like it's a lot of setup. There's a lot of world building. There's a lot of character backstory. There's a lot of characters that are introduced for the main character who's interacting with, either on a political level or as apprentices or helpers or whatever the case is. And he does have these little arc adventures, which is, again, very much in line with what a serial story does. Has these little mini adventures as you follow him along, and he's doing stuff, and they're like interesting. But that's what it is. There's no huge, a super engaging arc for me, at least, that would punch it up to just simply enjoyable. I like a slice story, so it wasn't anything that's negative in this state, but I always like to regulate a reader's expectations. Like, this is very much could be called Wizard's Tower, the setup for future stories, because that's what a lot of stuff happens here. For me, the lack of RPG progression on the half of the main character is probably the biggest drawback for me. Not that there isn't any progression. There's an RPG interface, there's levels, there's stats, skills, all that is part of this kind of fantasy world. It's just that other characters grow in that respect, and not with the main character, not at least until towards the end of the story. And that's mostly because of the way that the character is designed. He's a character that's hundreds of years old at the start of the story, and it even notes within the context of the story that he hasn't even looked at his version of a character sheet in years, because the information doesn't change. He's already high enough level that he's kind of overpowered, so he's not progressing in that respect anymore. His quests aren't updating. That shifts a little bit towards the end as events occur. But for like most of the story, he's not doing any RPG progression. All the RPG progression is happening on from his apprentices or from other characters in the story. And he's kind of like talking about, oh, you might think about developing your magical abilities in this respect, or he's teaching them spells and magical theory. There's a little meta, not gaming, but meta theorizing about why this system exists in this world in the first place, and the history of when it came about according to like myths and legends, and all that stuff exists in the story. So it's like there's no progression, no game mechanic stuff happening. Again, it's just happening more with other people. You see them progressing. I would have loved to see, my main character grow a level or get some new abilities and powers. The only way that this kind of happens in relation to the main character is the fact when he actually establishes his wizard's tower and he's able to do some base building and some potential dungeon building. But even then, that's sort of a lesser part of the story in this book. It may be something that's developed a lot more in future books, and which is why I always say, like, oh, this is kind of a setup book for a longer series potentially, because those mechanics are set up and there is some dungeon diving and monster, fighting and all that. There's pretty semi-regular action in the story. But again, it all sets up things that I think are meant to happen in the future, meant to be developed more and resolved in future books potentially. Overall, again, it's an entertaining story, very slice of life, just due to its serial nature, which is not a bad thing. Again, I like the kind of story. I was entertained enough that I didn't regret reading it. But at the same time, several times when I was reading it, I wondered, like, where is this story going? And I'm like, oh, this doesn't have the big arcs that I was expecting. And a lot of it is just set up for potential future plot lines in other books. So again, if you reading okay with that nature, I think you'll really enjoy the story. And lots of folks have really liked it. Go look at the reviews and the ratings, like the relatively positive, setup here. So if you're okay with that nature of the story, I definitely encourage you as a read. I had a good time with it. I'm giving it a 7.3 out of 10. It lost a little bit from me just because of I kept expecting the story to go a place. And it took me a little while to realize, oh, okay, this is just a serial. He's going to do some stuff. There are little plot arcs, but there's no major things, and a lot of the story is set up. So it took me a little while to adjust my thinking. But because I didn't realize it from the start, I kind of lost some enjoyment adjusting my expectations. I don't want that to happen to you. So go into it knowing what it is. And I think it always sets up a better experience if you have a reasonable expectation of what to expect from a story. So for me, again, that's going to get a 7.3 out of 10. That's Wizard's Tower, a LitRPG adventure. I enjoyed it. Just slightly lowered my enjoyment a little bit because of some story aspects, but still an enjoyable story.